Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And our special guest today is Alan Katz. How you doing, Alan?
I am doing great, Len. Thank you so much for having me. It is a genuine pleasure to be here.
Thank you, thank you. It's an honor to have you on. And you know, I was reading a lot about your background. I find it fascinating that you wore so many hats, and I'm sure I missed a few of these hats. But producer, editor, writer, creative consultant. There probably is a whole bunch more. But I was wondering, being in Hollywood, um, was there a certain role, anyone that I mentioned, that made you feel like, all right, this is it, I belong here?
Oh, that's a multifaceted question. First of all, getting onto the mountain that is the movie and TV business, it is a bitch to get onto. It really is. It takes a combination of effort, luck, and talent to get onto the mountain. Now, once you get onto the mountain, you suddenly realize that is not the hardest part of the assignment. Staying on the mountain. That is what will kill you. That is what will absolutely decimate you. But all right. When I came here to Los Angeles 40 years ago, all I wanted to be was a writer. But coming to Los Angeles, coming into the entertainment business and wanting just to be a writer is like wanting to be powerless. In the movie business, now the TV business is very different from the movie business, but in the TV business and movie business, very different as to the writer. In the movie business, the writer really is just the guy who does the blueprints. And it is an audio-visual medium. It is not a word-driven medium. And so it's just the nature of the beast that the person who is telling the story with images and sound and music is really and truly the writer of the movie. A screenplay is an important document. The storytelling is important. But look, if you really want to tell a whole story yourself as the writer, write a book or do a podcast. But if you're going to pour all your writing into a screenplay, you are misdirecting your talent and your storytelling time and efforts. It's not a writer's medium. It just isn't. Now, television is different because it is a writer-producer's medium. And whereas in a feature film, the director is God, because that's the core visionary. Let's call the director. In TV, the director, for the most part, is a traffic cop there to direct an episode. The creator of the show, in most cases, the writer producer, they're not only to write every word, well, to write the words, but to produce it, to become the head macher. More or less, to use a technical term. And TV evolved quite differently, where the writer, if they understood how to be a good producer too, you became the most powerful person. And I did not know this when I came to Los Angeles, but I learned it pretty quickly. And yeah, when I first got to Los Angeles, feature films that was the golden land, and TV was, well, you could do TV too.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's very, very different. TV is the great creative environment, and feature films are understood to be, well, if it's a superhero movie, a James Bond movie, a big pole movie, okay. Otherwise, they don't know how to do it. Those stories, TV can do everything that features can do, really, and then some. There's nothing in terms of special effects, in terms of the ability to shock and Yeah, TV, but TV wasn't that back then. Feature films were the thing back then. But if you wanted to have more control, well, TV was quite attractive because you could be with a story, and as the writer, you could get pretty close to final cut. And the vision you started with in your head, you could have an awful lot to do with the final vision that we spit out to the audience.
So let's take it back because I want people to understand it and what your trajectory and journey was. So first, where did you grow up?
I grew up, I I grew up in Baltimore. Um, it was okay. I couldn't wait to get the fuck out of there. It was a little too small for my tastes. I went to school in New York. I went to Vassar. I thought I was going to be a theater person. I thought I was going to be an actor, actually. I went to one audition after after I left Vassar, and I was terrible. I was probably poorly prepared for it, and I walked out of the audition thinking, oh, this sucks. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to act again until someone asks me nicely. I'm going to go be a writer instead, which even harder in many ways. But that worked out because I actually have been writing professionally since I was 16.
So let's go back to that a little bit, Alan, in Baltimore. What was your family life like? Were your parents together? Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I grew up in an upper middle class Jewish suburb called Pikesville.
Mhm.
My dad was a surgeon, and everyone most of the people in our social circle were other physicians, a couple of lawyers. So everyone I knew was a doctor's kid. Most of the people that I went to high school with are very successful physicians, a couple of lawyers. I was one of the few oddballs. Me and the person, Carol Yumkis, who I grew up with, she became an agent at William Morris.
So,
And
Mhm.
and that was why I ended up out in Los Angeles. Carol said, "Hey, have you thought about writing a screenplay?" So I did, and she said, "That's pretty good. You should come out and meet and greet people."
Interesting.
And so it was Baltimore that lured me out.
Yeah, I hear you on that, being from Philly and living in LA now. But so were you, as a kid, were you into writing? Was that reading, writing?
Yeah,
Was that?
I was always a reader. I
Mhm.
was always writing. That
Mhm.
was always when in class you had a choice of doing a little presentation.
Yeah.
Hey, I was the one who wrote it and made it very theatrical. Yeah, that was me. I was always in from middle school through high school. Every time there was a play, I was in it.
So
Yeah.
when you moved to LA, and uh, was what was the first gig that you got? Or was that through Carol, William Morris? What did you
Among
do
the
first?
when I arrived in LA, I had written a script called French Kiss. It was oh no, I'd written that's what I said with Gil. A thing called Down to Earth about a radio shock jock. And a visitation from another planet. It was a black comedy, and a lot of people liked it. Among the people who liked it, and had another movie that I was pitching, was a guy named Gil Adler. And I met Gil he was one of the first producers that I met and was pitching to, and we became best friends. And Gil was not only a movie producer looking for projects, he had come out of the theater, and he had been trained as an accountant, and he understood the basic principle that if you have $1 to spend on your show, your movie, your TV show, do not spend $1. You haven't got it. But hey, if you can do your movie or TV show for 99 cents or 98 cents, make it still look like that dollar, that's great. Hey, if you could do it for 97 cents and make it look like $1, $1, $2, $3, well, now you're into something. And the creative process is always, it's problem solving. And Gil's solution to any problem wasn't to throw money at it, it was to throw more creativity at it. And that's exactly how I feel. And Gil and I bonded over that, and kind of a mutual sense of humor. We started writing together, and Gil was very favored by HBO. He had done a show for them. He had produced a show for them called The Hitchhiker. And then they had a show called Vietnam War Stories, which was very expensive for them. They were deep into trouble. It was over budget and over schedule. And they sent Gil to Savannah, and he got it under control. And not only did he bring it in, it won awards. And about a year later, HBO was having trouble with another expensive production, a thing called Tales from the Crypt. And Tales, after its second season, had gone $1 million over budget, which the executive producers had to pay for out of their pockets, which made them fire everybody the night before the wrap party. And the third season was supposed to be the last year of the show. That was all that HBO had contracted for, and they were quite ready to with the executive producers. And HBO suggested that they hire Gil to go in as producer because Gil was the fixer. And since I was Gil's writing partner, Tales from the Crypt had never went through a development process like a normal TV show. This never happened. And
what does that mean, Al? What does it mean, development process? Like for people who are novice, they don't understand.
All right. When you come up with an idea for a TV show, you've got, all right, here are the characters, here's the premise for the pilot, the first episode. And in essence, that lays out, here's the setup, here's the premise. And every week in TV in the old days, it'd be a variation on the theme, because that's how you sold TV shows in the old days. And so the development process, you'd have the pilot, but you'd also write the Bible. You would write, okay, what happens the second episode of the first season? Now, back then, the whole enterprise was bigger because the goal was to get a TV show to 65 episodes. At 65 episodes, that was the magic number. That was enough to go into syndication. And syndication was where profitability was. Because the first time that a broadcaster plays an episode of a TV series, they pay what's called a license fee. And let's say they show it a second time. Well, even those 2 times showing it, whatever that license fee is, it is not going to cover the cost of production, not unless they're doing it on the cheap. Mm-hmm. So in the old days, if you could get it to 65 episodes, you could get it into syndication. Well, that's, like I said, that's where the profitability was. So you would get a deficit part. And they're the ones who covered the real cost of production. Well, HBO didn't care about 65 because they weren't in that business. They were in the subscription business. They paid for the cost of their shows via subscribers. At the time that HBO did Tales from the Crypt, the TV landscape and the movie landscape, like I said, were incredibly different. And a couple of TV people like a Tom Hanks or Robin Williams would go from TV into feature films. But if you were going from features into TV, that was bad news for you. HBO was mostly movies at that point. They had begun dipping their toe into original content. They had a show called First and 10, another called Dream On. These were basically just single camera shows with tits and the word fuck. Yeah. That was basically what set them apart. But then a couple of big Hollywood producers approached them and said, we want to put feature film vision inside your little TV box. And HBO jumped up and down and said, yay, hooray, let's do it. And so they went right to work taking the project from the comic book. They just began writing scripts. Had they gone through a development process, they would have had someone like me, a creative person, a writer, come in and say, okay, how are we going to make sure that the thing we love about the comic books, let's call that the franchise. We take the franchise and we put it in the TV show. Because just because we say we're doing those shows, well, you kind of want it to feel like the comic book, right? You want the TV show to be the comic book as a TV show. Well, how exactly do you do that? It's not, there's not magic. You got to do it. You have to, and you kind of have to fill every frame the way that it looks, the way that you write the scripts, the way just that you do business. You have to build that brand, that house style in which you're going to tell these stories, because this is a very particular, this was based on the EC comics from the 1950s, and they had a very particular style, a very particular flavor. And so how you translate that into a TV show, that's part of the development process. You figure out, all right, how are we going to do this? What should the scripts be like? And usually there's someone, let's call them a story editor, or one of the executive producers, is their responsibility is to oversee that. They become the showrunner, in essence. That's really what they call them these days. The showrunner is responsible for overseeing the franchise. Well, they didn't do anything like that. And so no one was responsible for making sure that as they wrote the scripts, they felt like the comic book. And by the same token, the Crypt Keeper in the comic books is an old white guy with stringy hair. Well, the executive producers for Tales from the Crypt, which were 4 huge movie producers, Joel Silver, Richard Donner, Walter Hill, and Bob Zemeckis, they wanted their own Crypt Keeper. And Joel Silver found Kevin Yeager, who created the physical puppet. And Kevin found John Kassir, who became the voice of the Crypt Keeper. Great voice. You have great puppet, great voice, but it never went through a development process. No one ever said, okay, so we've got this great puppet and a great voice. Who is he? Because when you go to write for a character, okay, who is it? You can't write for a generic. Who is it?
Was it defined in the comic books? Who the
comic books was an old white guy with stringy hair.
But I mean, did they give it any? I'm not familiar with the comic book. Did they give it a character? Yes, I understand the visual description.
Yeah, you didn't. He talked about himself in vague terms, but in the comic books, it's less important, because in the comic books, the comic book story is important.
Right. And they made the character of the Crypt Keeper the key to the story versus just the introduction of the actual story.
In the comic books, they're characters, but they're not the franchise.
Right.
They're they're almost interchangeable. They're somewhat distinctive, but they're not the franchise. You wouldn't build merch based on them. There's just not enough there. All right. So the Crypt Keeper puppet, well, there was no development process there either. And so whoever wrote the scripts for the episodes would throw a few words to the Crypt Keeper and do a couple of creative things with it. But basically, because there was no character, no one wrote for the Crypt Keeper. When I went aboard, I had 2 jobs. My first job was to really take the whole development process and put it into me. So as all the scripts were turned in, I was responsible for making sure they were Tales from the Crypt appropriate. And so that was my first job, to take the franchise from the comic books and put it into the TV show. Job 1. My second job was to write Crypt Keeper segments, and I wrote all the Crypt Keeper segments. Well, as I sat down to write the Crypt Keeper, I bumped into a problem. He had never gone through the development process. There was no there. And I don't know how you write for a cipher, especially when you want the cipher to be funny. You can't write generic humor. It just doesn't work. And so simply to do my damn job, I needed to create the character. Now, in addition to being a very theatrical kid growing up, I loved old movies, old radio shows too, but I loved old movies. I love the Marx Brothers. Huge Marx Brothers fan. Groucho, especially the wordplay. Well, the Crypt Keeper became my little Groucho. And having to fill the Crypt Keeper with a personality and being a writer and therefore a little bit lazy, I reached for the closest thing at hand, which was me. And so I filled the Crypt Keeper with me. And so the character looks like the puppet. He sounds like John's voice, but every word that came out of his head, every thought, everything, his entire interior life was me. And a strange thing happened because we filled the Crypt Keeper with a life. Could have been me, could have been somebody else. It was just the fact that he suddenly had an interior life. It wasn't, it could tell you where he was born, and he had an inner life, and he suddenly became a franchise player. And yes, we also got bigger names back onto the show. Everyone from Michael J. Fox and Tom Hanks to Kirk Douglas to do our little TV show. We reestablished the franchise successfully, yeah. But what really, I think at the end of the day, because that's the thing that's most enduring, it's the Crypt Keeper. He became the franchise, and because he defined the franchise so particularly, suddenly it brought the franchise back to life. And the Crypt Keeper character became iconic. A bunch of years ago, they've been trying to remake Tales from the Crypt forever, but there's a problem. M. Night Shyamalan was the last one who tried. TNT wanted to do a Thursday night horror wheel, and Tales from the Crypt was going to be part of it. And M. Night Shyamalan was going to be the executive producer. But when he optioned the comic books, he didn't realize that the Crypt Keeper he was getting was the old white guy with stringy hair and not the Crypt Keeper, a separate piece of intellectual property owned by somebody else, owned by the Tales from the Crypt partners, those four big Hollywood producers. They own the Crypt Keeper.
Your version of Crypt Keeper.
My version of the Crypt Keeper is owned by the Crypt partners. They own that character. Now, the problem is among the Crypt partners, there's one of them is Joel Silver. And Joel is a legendary screamer as a producer. If you've seen the movie Roger Rabbit, at the very beginning of Roger Rabbit, there's a scene where Roger is acting on a set, and the director is screaming at him. The director is Joel Silver, acting the part of Joel Silver.
Or not doing any acting at all, just being
no
himself.
Acting required whatsoever. Joel he's a legendary producer, but he's also a legendary asshole. And many people find after a certain amount of time that life is too short to work with Joel ever again. And among the people who got past that tipping point was Bill Gaines's family. Bill Gaines is no longer with us. And they feel that Joel mistreated Bill and cheated Bill, and they would never make a deal with Joel Silver ever again. And so Tales from the Crypt and the Crypt Keeper are divorced forever.
Yeah, it's stuck in limbo.
Where will the children go for Christmas? Who knows?
There's this juxtaposition of humor and horror, scare, but I find it fascinating. There's a certain, how do I say this? The writing style is keeping you on edge, but it's not a scare. Like it's not horror where it's not, and there's some gore, but there's humor associated with that. Like it's keeps you scared. It doesn't just get you to be scared. And then it has a thread of this humor. So there's an entertainment that, some people are like, I love horror. I'm not a big horror fan, but that is not really horror. So how do you define the genre? It's such a unique kind of show that supports those two different things.
To me, Tales from the Crypt wasn't so much horror as it was black comedy. These were little morality tales where someone's going to get karmic payback in the most delicious, disgusting, ironic way possible. And so that was the point of the exercise. It was Yeah, karmic, the most horrible karmic payback imaginable.
You know, there's a correlation I make, and you did not bring this up, so I don't know if you've thought about this at all, but it reminded me of like a Monty Python kind of approach where, there's that movie where, the guy gluttony and he eats all this food and he blows up and it's
Oh,
gory,
what
but
a
it's funny.
wonderful scene. I love the Mr. Creosote scene. Mr. Creosote.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. It goes so over the line. It's so appallingly disgusting. It's and even after he blows up, the people are throwing up.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop. It's I love the relentless go for it nature where horror and comedy really they walk a very fine line and one can edge over into the other very easily.
So, and I find it fascinating also that you said that you've taken, your own character and put that into the Crypt Keeper. I wonder if this was sort of a safe space for you to work on some of the things that were going on with you, just your own fears, your own issues.
Alas, I was not at that particular time in my life and in my career as a creative person. I was not that connected to me. In fact, I was walking around life disconnected from me. I didn't even know it. I did not even know it. It turned out, and ultimately, for all the success I had with Tales from the Crypt, and we did a couple of feature films, something that was ultimately going to a time bomb that was going to go off at some point, and I ended up keeping a secret from myself for 45 years before I finally addressed it. I was 59, and I kept a secret for 45 years about the fact that I was sexually molested twice by the religious director at the synagogue where my family belonged outside of Baltimore on two occasions. The first time is bad, but it's the second time that really fucks you up. Well, it's what fucked me up because the second time is possible only because you didn't say anything the first time. And so when you walk in the door and you realize it's about to happen to you, all those times you said to yourself, that couldn't have happened. I must have made that up. No, you didn't make that up. You should have said something. And now it's happening to you again. And you suddenly, every terrible thing that happens to you thereafter, it's your fault. You did this. You brought this upon yourself. And as you go through life and the stakes get bigger and bigger and bigger and all kinds of things happen to you. And even when there's situations so far beyond your control, as with making the feature film Bordello of Blood, the circumstances that caused us to make that fucking movie had nothing to do with me. I didn't want to make that movie. And sure, I could have walked off that movie, but that would have been the end of my career. So, you sometimes you find yourself walking a path you don't want to be walking on, and rather than approach it with actual perspective, you can't have actual perspective because there's this thing inside of you telling you a bullshit story about how awful you are. Well, I ended up, after making Bordello of Blood, my partnership with Gil ended. I went through a 2 decades long deepening depression and writer's block. At the end of it, I came within literal inches of killing myself. And not only self-loathing, but a complete and total lack of confidence in me as a human being because I blamed me for this terrible thing.
Were you aware of it? Like, did you suppress it and push it down, and then some came out, or were you always aware and just not dealing?
No, I knew it was. I'll walk you through the steps. I came within inches of killing myself, and I knew I had to do something. I'd been contemplating medication for a while, but I said my dad was a doctor. and I grew up in the medical culture. I know how that culture is, and I knew that no one, they are not trained in the kind of medications, mood stabilizers. They're not. Whatever they had on hand, the last pharmaceutical rep who walked through their office said, "Hey, you got some depressed patients? Try them out on this. See if this helps." And so, I was going to get an experiment. Well, with mood stabilizers, it could take 6 to 8 weeks, and it's a crapshoot anyway. You could discover it's not making it better; it's making it worse. I knew I was depressed. Because I was depressed, I was not able, and not writing. I was not making money in the business anymore. I was delivering wedding cakes. Man, I had fallen so far off everything. But when I came within inches, I suddenly realized I had to do something, and I drove right to my GP's office. I told him, "Hey, here's what I almost did, and here's what I've been thinking about." I had done some research on a mood stabilizer that I wanted to get back. I wanted my creative life back. I thought if I could get my creative life back, I could have a shot at doing something still, at having a reason to be here. And I said to my GP, I got to say, when I walked in, I said what I had just about done. I got not only my GP, I got the head doctor of the whole office. And they asked me 3 times if I thought I maybe should be hospitalized. That's how bad it was. I said, no, look, it's 3 days before Christmas. I came here because I want to do something. And I told them what I was thinking. I said, look, I found this thing called lamotrigine. I'd like to try it. And they said, well, they got out their smartphones. I went, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And they wrote the script. And I picked it up. I went home. I told my family what I was going to do, because it's a crapshoot. You don't know what it's going to do, but I thought I got to do something. I got to try something. Otherwise, I'm going to hurt myself for real. And then I got really, really lucky. Within 36 hours, I leveled. I felt the darkness. It got put into a box. The darkness doesn't disappear. It's still there, but suddenly it could no longer get at me. And because the darkness could no longer get at me, I could face the secret that I'd been keeping for myself. And it was because the darkness was under control and could no longer get at me. I mean, literally, 36 hours after taking that first minimal dose, man, anything could set me off. A political discussion on the radio. Trump had just won his first term. And so, yeah, I was not alone in losing my shit. Yeah. I felt the rage in my gut. It coming up like a lava flow about to burst out of my mouth. And just as it got to my mouth, rather than explode, it dissipated like a soap.
Can I offer you some reflection on this? I'm just thinking through this. So you had this career with iconic character. You did a Freddy, didn't you?
Yeah,
do like a Freddy.
Did a bunch of episodes of Freddy's Nightmares. I wrote
Freddy's Nightmares. Was it Children of the Corn movie?
Yeah, the children. I wrote the Children of the Corn too.
Like all these different. So there's horror, but it's not. It's hard, but it's a different, like how you just described it. The way that I see that, you put a signature, whether you realize this or not. There is a signature of you that's in these movies and these TV shows that has this level of sarcasm, this humor, these characters that, yes, there's scare and there's fear, but there's also, what I would offer you is maybe there was an outlet that you used in your writing and what you were going through, and you projected it through your characters that had complexity, not only like, hey, it's a slasher movie. They're there to, no, there was some of that. And when that was taken away, or whatever you want to call it, now you didn't have that outlet anymore. So now you have to deal with that yourself. And that maybe caused a little bit of that spiral.
Well, something else happened after I got well. There was one more thing that happened that was key. When you can't even tell yourself your own story, can you really tell anyone else's story? Really? Can you? When I suddenly could tell myself my own story, and it was hard. Coming clean to myself, that was a weekend, hardest weekend I've ever gone through emotionally, because of just, and yeah, for the first time, I wept for the 14-year-old me who nobody was there to care for. And that was essential to a healing process. And not only did I stop blaming myself for what had happened to me, I began to get healthy. And once I could tell my story to me, and I could tell my story to other people, because that was important. Keeping it a secret had not done me any good. And it just happened. The Me Too movement was happening. So, hey, that worked out well. Suddenly the fact that I could tell my story with balls to the wall honesty. Well, now I can tell anybody's story with the exact same attention to detail, honesty wise. And I went from being, I think, a really good writer to being a storyteller. And I think that it actually, the revelation of the past deepened my skill set. It added a whole other range of notes and colors and textures that I did not have before, and an appreciation for where truth in anyone's story actually resides.
So the writing, like Tales from the Cats, what would be the plot twist? Is it successful writer goes to Hollywood, or you're good at Hollywood, you become a successful writer, you have all these different things, then things fall apart, there's a crash, there is a self-work resurgence, and now Alan comes out as a brand new storyteller. Or are there other plot twists along the way that...
Yes, there's one more huge plot twist, and it's podcasting. It's podcasting. And right, I had been telling the stories of the making of Bordello of Blood for the 20 years that I spent going down into that black hole, because the experience of making it was the antithesis of making Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt was everything you'd want the creative process to be. It was challenging, but so rewarding. We were so free. Working for HBO, God, of the 70 some odd episodes I did over 5 seasons, I got 3 notes. 3 notes total. It was, and everyone who worked on the show, as we all look back at our careers, we would all tell you that was one of the highlights, because of the creative freedom. It's not like we had money with which to make that show. We did that really smoke and mirrors, but like I said, we didn't solve problems by throwing money at it. We solved it by throwing more creativity at it. And so for creative people, it was an incredible, rewarding challenge. Bordello being its antithesis and my downfall, the end of my time on the mountain. Well, I spent a couple seasons on the Outer Limits.
Why do you say downfall? Because it didn't do as well, and you took the blame. Like, why do you feel
the movie, as far as the audience, the story of the making of Bordello of Blood, like I said, it undermined, because we were supposed to make that movie. We were supposed to make a whole other movie as the second Tales from the Crypt movie. We were supposed to make something called Dead Easy, which neither Gil and I were horror guys. I'm comedy, and Gil's comedy. We both wanted to make comedies, and we very much wanted to demonstrate to the town that we were not one-trick ponies who could only do horror. We wanted to say, hey, Tales from the Crypt is funny horror. Well, we can do the funny. And for the second Tales from the Crypt feature, we had been developing Dead Easy, which the first Crypt feature, Demon Knight, is a terrific movie, but it's a monster movie. And since the partners wanted to make that first, Gil was supposed to direct the first movie. Gil didn't want to do a monster movie. He wanted to do something else. And so he stepped aside, and Ernest Dickerson directed the first movie, Demon Knight. And so Gil and I began developing what was going to be the second Tales from the Crypt feature. We had found this script called Fat Tuesday. We evolved it into a thing called Dead Easy. It was a taut psychological thriller about a recovered memory. It took place in the swamps outside New Orleans. Recovered memory. That's interesting. Something about the swamps outside New Orleans. And it had a great villain, this wonderful Harlequin character. We spent 18 months working on the script. It was really terrific. The whole creative crew at Tales from the Crypt, we were dedicated to this movie. We loved it. We spent months in New Orleans prepping the movie. We were casting. We had cast a young unknown named Salma Hayek to be the female lead. We were down the road literally 3 weeks before the start of principal photography in New Orleans. And we get a call from Universal Pictures, our studio. They said, stop spending money, come home. You're not making that movie. So we all get on a plane and we come home, and they stick a script under our nose. They said, you're going to make this instead. Your release date hasn't changed. You still start principal photography in 3 weeks. Get to work rewriting this thing, Bordello of Blood, guys. So where did Bordello of Blood come from? Okay. At about the same time that we're making our movie, a little bit before it, a new studio called DreamWorks had come into existence. And DreamWorks was Steven Spielberg leaving his deal at Universal, not the lot, but leaving his deal and becoming a separate entity, and began making talent deals with other talent, as studios do. Universal was desperately afraid of losing another big piece of talent. One of my executive producers, Bob Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, was his mentor. Universal approached Bob. They said, Bob, we love you at Universal. What can we do to make this? And I don't know any other part of that deal. Obviously, it was good enough. Bob stayed. I can tell you one deal point. Universal Pictures agreed to buy the first student script that Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the future Back to the Future guys, ever wrote when they were film school students at USC for $500,000, called Bordello of Blood. It was simply a deal point, a way to put money in the two Bob's pockets as a nicety. No intention to make the movie, except Universal suddenly began thinking to itself, are we just going to eat this $500,000? Hey, wait a minute. Bob's about to executive produce this other thing, this Dead Easy thing. Well, we spent $50,000 on that script. Fuck that shit. We'll take it out of their budget. Guys, you're going to make Bordello of Blood instead. Hey, it's got Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale's name on it. That's bigger than Alan Katz and Gil Adler's name. And so, guys, get to work. Start rewriting Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale, pal. And fortunately, Bob Z, I loved working for Bob Z. Everything I know about the art of collaboration, I learned at that man's feet. A wonderful collaborator. And Bob was incredibly gracious, because you didn't expect this. This was not, this was unexpected. And so he said, do whatever you got to do, because really, he had nothing invested in it. It was nothing to him. Now, the problems began immediately, because the hero of the story is a small town detective. Now, ask yourself, how much business can a detective actually do in a small town? Not enough to be a small town detective, not enough business. It's a character that doesn't exist in reality. And so you can't explain who that character is, even to himself, because he does not exist. He is the kind of character that only film school students would write, because they haven't lived out in the real world for 10 seconds and would recognize, oh, it's a non sequitur. Yeah, it's just that character really can't exist in any way, in any meaningful way. All right. Once you start there, there's nowhere to go. There was no way to make that movie. Well, the problem was that we were all in mourning for the movie we all wanted to make, Dead Easy. We all were invested in a psychological thriller that was going to prove to the town that we were not one-trick ponies. Instead, we're trying to wrestle a student movie to the ground just so we could make it. And then our executive producer, Joel, decided that he would cast the three leads. And regardless of what Gil and I wanted, we wanted Danny Baldwin for the lead. He cast Dennis Miller. I couldn't tell you why to this day. Couldn't tell you why. Hey, our audience wanted gory special effects. They did not give a fuck about a political comedian named Dennis Miller. Neither he nor, and hey, Dennis Miller didn't want to do the movie. And when Joel said, "Hey, Dennis, I want you to do the movie," Dennis said, "All right, give me $1 million," figuring no one in their right mind would pay Dennis Miller $1 million to be in their movie. For some reason, this very savvy movie producer, Joel Silver, said, "Okay, I'll pay you $1 million." Well, we didn't have $1 million in the budget for that role. We had $500,000. We had a $12 million movie. We went to Universal. We said, "Can we get some help, a little breakage, to help pay for our star?" They said, "We don't give a fuck about Dennis Miller. There's nothing to us. We don't know why you cast him." And so we had to take it out of our budget. Well, all the money was in makeup special effects because that's what our audience wanted to see. So we took the money out of makeup special effects, what our audience wanted to see, to pay for an actor our audience didn't give a fuck about. But those were the kind of decisions that were being made over my head. Couldn't do anything about. Well, once the casting in almost in any enterprise where you have actors, once you've cast the actors, 90% of the work is done. You're not going to change who they are. The actor is set in concrete. That is set in concrete now. It is what it's going to be. So, all right, now, however, I know why Joel wanted Erica Leniak, but what he actually wanted to happen was not going to happen. She was in a steady relationship, and after saying yes to being in our movie, Bordello of Blood, decided she didn't want to be that kind of actress in those kind of movies anymore. And so she insisted before she would get on an airplane while we were already shooting, before she would get on an airplane to be in wardrobe the next day, that we had to rewrite the script overnight to accommodate that fact.
So no nudity, basically, for her. Shouldn't want to.
There was never any nudity for her character anyway. It had to do with who her character was. We had to rewrite her character completely so that she couldn't be a former porn star. But she ended up being a former porn star, but a former plus size porn star. I don't know why that was acceptable, but okay. Finally, hey, the most important character, most important actor in your horror movie is the villain. It's the villain. It's everything. Demon Knight. Hey, Billy Zane's an amazing villain in Demon Knight. He's great. We wanted Robin Gibbons. But Joel, at the same time that we were just about to start making Bordello of Blood in Vancouver, which another stupid decision, in Vancouver, Joel was making another movie in Seattle. He was the executive producer of a movie called Assassin, starring Antonio Banderas and Sly Stallone, being directed by another of my executive producers, Dick Donner. One day on the set, Sly Stallone approaches Joel and says, "Hey, Joel, you can make a movie in Vancouver and put my girlfriend Angie in the movie and we can visit each other across the border." At the time, Sly was engaged to supermodel Angie Everhart. And Joel, rather than being a responsible executive producer and saying, "That's a great idea, Sly, but let me check with the guys to make sure it checks out with them," he said, "That's a great idea, Sly." Period. And so suddenly we were casting Sly Stallone's girlfriend for the part of our villain. Now, Angie is a lovely person. She's a really genuine, a wonderful, wonderful person. She was a very talented supermodel, but she had not much experience as an actor. And this is not a fair ask on our part, asking someone without the bona fides or, frankly, the confidence to pull off a part. Now, here's the even more important than any of that. I cast an awful lot of actors in my career. And I can tell you, when I cast anyone for movies or TV show, I did not cast anyone to act. The last thing I wanted any actor I hired to ever do was act. If they're working in the theater, yeah, there they got to act because the people in the back row have to see and hear them. You need to act. But the camera is right there in your face. It sees everything. You don't have to act. I always cast actors to be. And acting for the camera is about being as emotionally naked, as honest as you possibly can be. And we'll give you a different name, some words we'll stick in your mouth. But the job really is to, as the scene happens, to hit a light switch of a kind and not this emotion, feel this emotion, be this emotion. And that's what great film acting is. It's being. In the first movie, in Demon Knight, Billy Zane's a wonderful villain because Billy's an egomaniac. And yeah, there's something monstrous about Billy, but there's something monstrous about Billy. There is. Hey, he's the villain in Titanic, and
He's a great villain in everything that he's in. He's amazing.
But that's the thing about Billy. He's not acting per se. Really, there's an awful lot of being there. Well, Angie's a really nice person. There's nothing villainous about Angie whatsoever. And so for Angie to portray the villain of the monster in a horror movie, she had to act her heart out. That's the problem. She had to act her heart out, and that's not what the job requires. She has no way of doing anything else because she wasn't qualified to do the job we hired her to do. But she didn't get hired because we saw a piece of acting she did and said, wow, this would be a clever piece of casting. We hired her because Sly Stallone said, hey, put a movie. Joel was very happy to service his big feature film at the expense of his little feature film. He did really, and that was really part of what was happening with Tales from the Crypt. The people responsible were dropping the ball in real time. Now, the other problem we had was that Stallone had an ulterior motive. And he intended to use our movie as a consolation prize for when he dumped Angie, which is what he intended to do. And it's what he did 2/3 of the way through making our movie. We were hey, I got you a feature film, didn't you? I got you on a movie, didn't I? So this is what Joel, this is my executive producer.
Did it change her acting actually when she was had to emote differently because she was
no, it got harder because she wasn't a trained actress, and so now we had to talk her down off the ledge every day just to get her scenes done, because she was connected with the fact that there's a hole in the center of her heart.
Yeah.
And so it just got harder to, so now she's distracted in addition to acting. It's not her fault in no way, shape, or form. It's got nothing to do with her. This was everyone else making these terrible mistakes. Well, I'd been telling the story of the making of Bordello of Blood for all those 20 years that I spent in the hole. It was a terrible, terrible experience. But yeah, there was some catharsis in telling those stories. So just after the pandemic, Tales from the Crypt is experiencing a resurgence. A fan group starts a podcast called Dads from the Crypt. 3 dads, they review all the episodes of Tales from the Crypt and give parenting advice. One of the dads, Jason Stein, reached out to me. He said, hey, we're going to be reviewing one of the episodes you wrote. You want to sit in with us? I said, and it was such fun. A few weeks later, Jason reached out again. He said, we're going to be reviewing Bordello of Blood. You want to talk about it? And I said, Jason, the story of the making of Bordello of Blood is not a half-hour conversation with you guys. It's a whole podcast unto itself. And I suddenly realized what I had to do. And so I set out to tell the story of the making of Bordello of Blood. It became the first season of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. Now, in order to tell the story the way that I knew I had to tell it, which was balls to the wall honesty, because now that I know how to tell a story, I was going to tell the whole story. But in order to tell it, I needed to reach out to Gil and talk to Gil in 25 years. I think 25 years we had not talked, and there was a lot of animosity. But in order to tell the story, I knew, I had to talk to Gil. And so I reached out to Gil, and he reluctantly agreed to go forward. I said, here's the deal. We have not talked about what happened in our relationship. We will talk about that, but we're not going to talk about it beforehand. I want to do that on mic, and I want to use it. And he reluctantly said, okay. And that was the rule. And in telling the story with balls to the wall honesty, and I talked to a lot of other people who helped make the movie, and gosh, and talking to the Canadian production manager, boy, she had tried to remove Bordello of Blood from her resume, but of course, in the age of the IMDb, you can't.
Yeah.
That's people. When I went back up to make Outer Limits in Canada, a lot of years after Bordello of Blood, the Canadian crews in Canada still remembered Bordello of Blood for how much they hated the Americans. By the time we left, at the wrap party in Canada, Christine Neistat, our production manager, threw the wrap party because we knew our Canadian crew hated us so much they would never come to any wrap party we threw. So she threw the wrap party, and she invited the Americans. I was the only American who showed up. It was so awkward. It was what a horrible, horrible experience. So telling it in the podcast was cathartic.
How is that a conversation with your writing partner on the podcast where you haven't spoken in 25 years, but you're
genuinely emotional?
Yeah.
And it's there in the podcast. When there was a certain moment of betrayal, I would say, when I think Gil did something he should have walked away. I got fired, or they stopped negotiating with me. They put them being fired off the neck. After Tales from the Crypt, we were supposed to do a science fiction series. And as we were negotiating on that, suddenly Joel said, I don't want Alan to be on the show. And so basically everyone else from Tales from the Crypt who had been there for all those years was back, and I was the problem, apparently. And okay, so I was let go, and I expected Gil to walk with me, to go with me, to say, well, if you're not going to have Alan, he just did Tales from the Crypt. Why would you not have this guy to do a new show? No, he stayed, and they did a show called Perversions of Science, which I think the order was 12. They cut it off after 10. Its problem was, the stories are okay. They're just science fiction stories. The host is a sexy robot. She's one note. She's a sexy robot. After you've told that joke, 2 times, you got nowhere else to go. And it's a sexy robot. Who the fuck could she possibly be? You have nowhere to go. You painted yourself into an absolute corner with your host, with your franchise. Well, when Perversions of Science went down the shitter, that was not an unhappy moment for me, but it was an isolated, a happy, but I told you so kind of a moment, but I was isolated from the group because at least they all got to make that show.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, but it felt good in a way that it didn't
a
do
kind
that
of
well.
vindication that
Yeah.
and it's not until recently that I suddenly understand what they did wrong and why I think I might have been there to save them, simply because I would have fought for a character that you could write, because it would have been my job to write that character. I don't know how I would have fought for a character that could be written. That character was unwritable because there's no there. They made they made a Crypt Keeper mistake again.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question, because the industry has changed so much.
Oh,
and
gosh.
there's AI now and all these other stuff. If somebody has an idea for a show, and do they have to get an agent? Do they submit it? Do they have to do the whole Bible, as you said? Do they have to write the first episode, or what do you do today?
Okay.
It's different than when you did back then.
The TV business is very fucked up. And that's in part because of in a way, HBO, it Tales from the Crypt is quite responsible for changing the culture at HBO and from changing there's a story about the cast and crew screening of the first 3 episodes of Tales from the Crypt. And these were 3 brilliant episodes. The first one is Dig This Cat, He's Real Gone by Dick Donner. Zemeckis is all through the house. And Walter Hill's The Man Who Is Death. And after they rolled the episodes in front of the cast and crew, and some critics were there, one of in the second row, one of the crew turns to the other, says, "Wow, that's great TV." And the other crew person says, "It's not TV, it's HBO." And the 2 HBO execs in the row ahead of them turned back and realized not only did they just hear their slogan, they just heard their culture. And in the way that HBO suddenly merged feature films and TV inside the little box, we also changed their culture. And because the business model was different, subscription. So they don't have to get to 65. And they could tell a cohesive story over the course of multiple seasons. So that, they don't have to worry about playing in syndication where people are going to watch it all out of order. They didn't care about that. And so they could tell stories like The Sopranos and tell that, hey, in between season 5 and season 6, what was it, a year and a half? What the fuck was that? But a completely different model, and you're not beholden to 65. So you could tell whatever stories you want to tell. Well, Netflix ultimately that's the core idea behind streaming. You can tell whatever story you want. And they added the extra idea that, and you can eat it all at once. You don't have to sit there and be a slave to them dishing it out. Here's a week, here's another week, here's another. Eat the whole thing at once. And that radical idea, while very exciting creatively and appealing to the audience for a little bit, was economic catastrophe. Because the problem with a show that the audience can eat all at once, that's today. What are they going to eat tomorrow? Because it took 6 months to make that thing they ate in one night. Now you got to spend to get the thing you're going to eat tomorrow. That's got to be happening now. And so
there's a million channels, nothing ever to watch. Exactly.
Well, because it still costs a lot of time and money to make these things, and to make them really well. Yeah, that takes even that takes even more time. Not money necessarily, but making things well takes time, and it gets expensive after a while. Well, the streaming wars destroyed all the TV business. Then the pandemic, and then the strikes, the writer's strike and the SAG strike. Production here in Los Angeles is down substantially, but that's in part because after the streaming wars ended and Netflix won and Disney won to a degree, everyone else lost and retrenched. And there's just not money for production. There's also nobody really knows, trying to figure out what does the audience want. And then the election happened. And suddenly there's a whole lot of fear out there because you don't want to make something that suddenly is going to be politically problematic for you. So all the decision making has gotten more and more indecisive. And these are risk-averse people to begin with. All right. All of that is a way to say, if you have an idea for a TV show or a movie, and the movie business is all about superheroes. All right. So let's assume you're talking about a TV show. All right. It's going to take you years to write that one script, whatever that first episode is, that demonstration episode. It's going to take you years to get it right. It's just how the writing process is. If it would be great if we could write the last draft first. God, it'd be amazing if someone could invent a machine that did that, but it never happens. You have to write the first draft first, and then the second, and the third, and the fourth, and they all take time. And that's how projects evolve into what they will eventually become. You can't do it any other way. It takes time, a lot of time. Then once it's ready for the marketplace, you think, well, you got to have to, if you're going to write a Bible, you got to, well, you wrote the first episode. What happens the rest of season 1, Ace? And season 2, 3, 4, 5? Because, yeah, you want people to invest in this. There's money only in longevity or cohesiveness. Yeah, one way or the other. So it takes a long time to write that Bible. Count on it just to get it all right. It could take you another 6 months to a year. Time you're going to have to spend. All right. Now you want to get it to the executives. Well, all right. Getting anyone to read anything is so hard. It's so hard. So to induce them to read, you got to create a pitch deck, which is a comic book version of it's a PowerPoint presentation where you reduce the whole thing to a comic book to induce them to just fucking read. You've spent years just to get a guy in an executive suite to fucking read your script, and that's at the top of the meat grinder. If they go, okay, then, oh man, it's a meat grinder, and there is sausage at the other end, but you have no idea what kind of fucking sausage is going to come out. Okay. And you as the writer, the moment, man, you lost control of this thing early on, you just didn't know it. All right. I have a different idea for this person for whom you are speaking on their behalf. And they need an advocate, and you're a wonderful advocate, Len. All right. I'm like the guy in The Graduate who says to Benjamin, plastics. I'm that guy, except I'm not saying plastics. It's another P word. It's podcasting. It's podcast. The guy in The Graduate. Podcasting. But podcasting is better than plastics because it doesn't leave little nubbins all over that get into our bodies. With a podcast, well, first of all, there's only to create the podcast. Hey, I can sit down and write that script or however the podcast story has to be told. That whole process of getting through a movie or TV show, there are thousands of assholes standing in your way. And at any one point, any one of those assholes can kill your project dead just because they're an asshole. Do a podcast. There's only one asshole ever standing in your way. And if it's me, when I make the podcast, I'm the asshole. I just do the work. And then, because relatively speaking, it doesn't cost much to make a podcast. Time is worth money. One's time is worth money. But okay, let's assume we can catch that on the back end. So you could produce great content with the equipment you have on hand, pretty much, and you can make great content. Now, the thing that you're really trying to sell when you walk into that executive suite, in reality or virtually these days, what's the IP? What's the concept? What's the IP? Well, if you do it as a podcast, you've put the IP right there on the table. It's there in the podcast where everybody, the audience, can hear it. And if you created great content and you've got a pretty good audience, you've got some advertisers, well, yeah, then you'll never have to go sell this IP like you would have in the old days to walk into an executive suite trying to sell your idea, singing and dancing. Here's what my IP is. Everybody knows what it is. And if it's good IP, as is happening with more and more regularity, because these are risk-averse people who they're going to buy an idea where they have to imagine what it is. Now they know what it is. And they can explain to their boss, great podcast. We've had a great audience. Look at this. And rather than you selling it to them, they've come to buy it from you. And they're going to say, hey, this would make a great movie or TV show. And you'll go, yeah, it would, wouldn't it? And they're going to, well, here's a check. And hopefully you're going to go, well, that's a nice check, but you got to add some more zeros and move the decimal point over because you have competition next. Because it's great content. And everybody knows what it is. And so rather than have to be sellers will be people going to sell, people will come to us to buy. And in this way, I think by doing it as a podcast, first, we can flip the power dynamic from the money back to the creatives. Simply because we've told the story the way we wanted to. Now, hey, most of the podcasts that I'm doing now, and I've got 4 out now, and I've got a dozen more coming. I've got 4 that I'm going to release over the summer. I've got 4 journalistic podcasts that I'm so excited about, working with 4 different journalists. Wow, so exciting, these stories. You could never do them in any other medium. And a couple of them, yeah, they'd make great TV series. But rather than have to go convince executives, and the great thing is we'll have told the story the way we wanted to. Now, hey, if they want to turn any of this stuff into a movie or TV show, do I want to be involved? Maybe, I don't know. You know, like I said, I've already told the story the way that I wanted to. And I know from experience that it's a tortured process. Since I've already told the story I wanted to, the way I wanted to, whatever they do, they do. You know, it is what it is. I'll take my money. I'll show up at the meetings I have to show up to. And if I want to get emotionally involved, I can. I don't have to. There's nothing at the end of the day. I've done everything and I got my money. And that's the key, because doing it as a podcast first, you own everything. Ownership is everything.
Yeah, power as well.
Yes.
I love that.
Ownership is the power to say, no, that's not a fair deal. You're trying to screw me. Fuck off.
Yeah.
No is where all the power is. And so, yeah, that's why when they come and they say, here's a check, you can go, no. When you want to write a real check, we'll talk. Until then, go the fuck away. That's where the power lies.
Love it. Great advice. All right. So I have some questions I ask all my guests, music related for the most part.
Go for it.
So if you recall, and if so, what was the very first concert that you ever attended?
James Taylor at the in Columbia, Maryland, the Merriweather Post Pavilions.
What was the last concert that you went to?
Oh gosh. Hold on. Who did I just? Oh gosh, I know I saw someone recently, really recently, and I'm going up. Well, bloody hell. Oh,
what's memorable
geez.
to you? What stands out?
Well, I did. You know, Paul Simon's about to go out again. I saw his final tour at the Bowl, and it was wonderful.
I love these final tours. I think I saw the last 3 final Rolling Stone tours and spent thousands of tickets.
We saw Seal at the Bowl, and that was terrific. He is a great live performer.
Amazing.
Wow, he is amazing.
I saw him at Beach Life Fest last year. He was fantastic. Okay. For next year, did you remember?
Oh yeah, there was one more. A couple of great shows at the Greek. My favorite group to see live at the Greek, whenever they're in town, I try to see them. Thievery Corporation.
I was there. It's one of the best. They're playing next week. I know Rob Garza a little bit. So
you know Rob Garza?
Yeah.
Fuck me. Oh.
Yeah, one of my favorite bands of all time.
Really? Oh my God. That's so fun. Oh yeah. Well, there's probably yet another reason why we do seem to click. That's so strange. Yeah, I love Thievery. Love them.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. I just saw Portishead last week too, in the same genre.
Oh gosh, yeah.
All right, so
trip hop, baby, trip hop.
Exactly, trip hop. So for the next year, you can only listen to 5 albums, and you don't have to remember the name of the album. It could be, Theory Corporation, whatever. What will be those 5 albums?
Gosh, I've got a 26-year-old and a 24-year-old, and I am constantly being infused with new music. My son Tristan is into urban hip hop, so there's always that in one ear. My daughter is into female voices, just strong female voices. So I'm always hearing a lot of that stuff. There's so much flooding into my zone, and especially because doing what I do, I make so many podcasts. I'm always looking at music and music tracks, and so there's so much music in my head. That's a very hard question to answer simply because there's so much music and it's
Well,
such
you're gonna get music. So this is your choice of albums that you're gonna listen to for the next year. This is out of your control. Of course, you're gonna listen to whatever your kids listen to here or there. You're making these choices for only these five for the next year.
well.
What do you think they would be?
Okay. All right. If I was gonna, all right. The Thievery
And
Corporation.
I know it changes. By the way, if I were asked that question, you can ask me 2 hours from now, and my list will change.
Okay. All right. I'm five. All right. Thievery Corporation, The Richest Man in Babylon, and oh gosh, I'm just going up on the name of the other album that also is the couple of terrific albums that I listen to those relentlessly anyway. It's just when I got to chill, yeah, I'll go there. Early Elvis Costello. What's the one that has My Aim Is True? That album is loaded with great songs you can go back to again and again and again. I am a big fan of Paul Simon's
Graceland?
Graceland. Thank you. I that whole album, I'm and Graceland. I there's something about that song that I love the idea of these pilgrims on a pilgrimage to Graceland. It's American pilgrims going to the quintessential American thing, and they're also American in that song. Paul Simon has written some wonderful songs about America. His song, American Tune, I go back to relentlessly, especially these days. I think of his song, what's the we're all gone to look for America. That song as kind of one end and American Tune is the other end, two bookends to an America, wow, going hopeful and then bordering on hopeless. And so I think he's captured something quite remarkable over the course of his creative life. I got one more to come up with. I'm dip. Joni Mitchell, Hijira.
Okay.
That's Joni. I like Joni when she begins to find her jazz voice.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So final question.
Pulled that out of my ass.
It's a good list. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
My room growing up, there was cork on one wall, so I could lots of stuff. Desk. It was across the hall from my parents' room. It looked out onto a neighbor's house. We lived in an upper middle class suburb, so there was greenery, houses across the court. And there was carpeting in the room after a while. I put in carpeting. It's funny. I don't have any strong emotional attachment to that room. I spend an awful lot of time in it, but it's funny. I look back at that room and I could tell you what was in it, but I almost don't care.
Was there any artwork or any posters or anything?
Yeah. Tons of stuff. It ever changing, always changing.
Like movie, music, or a combination of all the above, or just art?
I put up articles from the newspaper that interested me, that would make stories, and that's what I put up a lot. There were probably some Marx Brother things, some W.C. Fields things. I'm sure a lot of those brain cells that remembered that stuff, they're gone, or for the moment inaccessible for
that's
whatever reason.
Right. Alan, where can people, find your content, engage with you? Anything else that you want to share?
Couple places they can go to the podcasts themselves, to the donor podcast.com, the donor podcast.com. Yep. They can go to the Hall Closet. The Donor Podcast is a podcast about it's an absolute true story about a friend of mine from school named Hal, who worked his way through medical school in the mid 1980s as an anonymous sperm donor. Jump forward 27 years, and Hal joined 23andMe, curious about his health genes. It never occurred to him the ramifications of contributing his DNA to a growing DNA database. He lost his donor anonymity. Suddenly, 7 total strangers found Daddy, except 6 of them had no idea their actual biological father was Hal, a sperm donor. It is. I got a taste for weird stories. I had Tales from the Crypt, The Outer Limits. And my taste for weird stories, after I started podcasting with the How Not to Make a Movie podcast, Hal approached me. He wanted to do it as a movie or a TV show. And I told him, for the reasons I explained here, don't. No. Especially the nature of Hal's story is so fucking weird. You could never do it as a TV show first. They'd ruin it.
Yeah.
So I said, let's do it as a podcast first, because then you'll get to tell the story exactly the way it was. He needed to change his name, and he needed to change some of the other names. I said, well, that makes you an unreliable narrator, because who can trust you? I said, I can tell your story, because then, hey, if I'm changing your name or any other names to protect everyone, I don't lose my integrity storyteller. In fact, I kind of gained integrity. I become the official. So this is my telling of Hal's story, and I call it the donor is a DNA horror story, because there really is a monster. There's a monster in this story. Let me tell you, I know horror stories apparently. So there's a monster in that one. So the donor a DNA horror story is at the donor podcast.com. The Hall Closet is about Donna Hall, absolutely true story. She grew up in the mid 1980s and the 90s in a lower tier crime family outside of Philadelphia. The Halls weren't the Corleones, but they made national headlines just the same. Donna, like I said, it's an amazing story about growing up in a crime family on a granular level. That's at the Hall Closet at thehallcloset.com. And I just started dropping a brand new podcast about Chinese medicine called Sage Wellness Within. And that's at sagewellnesswithinpodcast.com. At some point in the next 2 weeks, there will be a new website, costardandtouchstone.com, and that will be the perfect place to go. Costardandtouchstone.com will be where all of our podcasts, you can come in and we'll link you to everything. We'll tell you about everything that we're doing, everything that's coming up. It'll be the collecting place for, all the different things we're doing.
Love it. And for my audience, I want to thank you again for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, follow, all those things. It really helps a lot. And the feedback that everybody's given has been phenomenal, tremendous. So please keep that up. Thank you for buying my book, Making Cannabis Personal, on Amazon or wherever you get your books. And just want to say, Alan, thank you so much for doing this. So much fun. You're such a good storyteller. I think you found
thank you, Len.
You found your medium. This is exactly it. You're unfiltered and you can be yourself. And hopefully I gave you a little bit of a platform to share some of that. So,
indeed you did. And I'm always grateful for the platform. Always take me in my soapbox, happy to put it down on the ground and step onto it and just start howling at the moon.
Love it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Len.
Hey, everyone. So does anybody know what greening out means? I've been the recipient of so many calls over the years of people greening out. That means they took too much THC and had an adverse reaction. So I always recommend other things, but nothing really concrete. Now I can. There's a solution. It is called Antidose. Antidose.com is quick. It's rapid. It works immediately, safe and effective. So I love my props. If you are toasty or you are burnt, that's the difference. Now, I also love the 1 gummy, 2 gummy, 3 gummy floor. So just be aware, very narrow therapeutic window. You know exactly what you can take now if you've taken too much. Once again, it's Antidose at antidose.com. Get yours today. Hey everyone, thank you for watching and listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode, and hit that bell. Like, comment. I so appreciate that. And check me out on social under Len May or Len May DNA. Find out more on LinkedIn or lenmaycoaching.com. And remember, everything is personal.